Assalamu alaikum and a good day. I hope you people are good, doing well, as much as you can do, keeping yourself busy. And I think this online lecture program is also to keep you a little busy, but I assure you with no worry at all. Today we'll talk about the industrialization of America, how it became an industrial giant, and it's the output of goods and services in the country after Civil War increased by 44% between 1874 and 1883, just in 9 years, and continued to expand. What are the essentials of industrial growth? The first thing is that they found new natural resources after the Civil War, and also the opportunities. And these opportunities in return attracted the highest and most energetic, vigorous and expanding population. So the growth of country added constantly to the size of the national market, and high tariffs shielded that market from foreign competition. The immigrants coming from Europeans provided the additional labor needed by expanding industry. 2.5 million arrived in 1870, twice that number in 1880. So America was offering better economic opportunities first to Europeans and then later on to Asian also. The immigration saw America as a land of opportunity, which they still think it is, and for many it was. But for others, life in the United States meant a constant struggle for survival and grinding poverty. People who came and could not find a real good place for themselves, they really were the hard-stricken people. The first big business in America was railroads, and these railroads stimulated the economy indirectly, like foreign commerce and industry in earlier times. These were the multipliers speeding development. So the railroad purchase created thousands of jobs and led to countless technological advancement. America had a voracious appetite for traffic. Railroads in sparsely settled regions and areas with underdeveloped resources devoted much money and effort to stimulate local economy growth. Technological advances in railroads accelerated economic development, as they are like twins, and in many complex ways also. In 1869, George Westinghouse, which is still a big name in electrical goods, invented the air brake by enabling an engineer to apply the brakes to all cars simultaneously. And to pull the heavier trains, more powerful locomotives were needed. They in turn produced a call for stronger, a more durable rail to bear the additional weight. Steel itself reduced in cost because of technological developments, supplied the answer, for steel rails outlasted iron many times over despite the use of much heavier equipment. Then there was iron, oil and electricity. Iron manufacturing really got transformed, and the 10.3 million tons from 1860 of 920,000 tons turned into, as I said earlier, 10.3 million tons in 1900, within 40 years. And such growth would have been impossible but for the huge supplies iron ore in the United States and coal necessary to fire the furnace that refined it. Nature was really generous to United States of America. The petroleum industry expanded even more swiftly than iron and steel, and Edwin L. Drake drilled the first successful well in Pennsylvania in 1859, and during the Civil War, production ranged between 2 million and 3 million barrels a year. By 1890, the figure had leaped to about 50 million barrels. Before the invention of gasoline engine, the automobile, the most important petroleum product was kerosene, which was burned in lamps. It accounted for well over 2/3 of oil production in the early 70s. A great increase in the supply of crude oil, especially after the German-born chemist Hermann Faust perfected a method for removing sulfur from low-quality petroleum, drove prices down. So, two other important new industries were the telephone and electric light business. Both were typical of the period, being products of technical advances and intimately related to the growth of high-speed urban civilization that put great stress on communication. And the telephone was invented in 1876 by Alexander Graham Bell, who had been led to the study of acoustics through his interest in the education of the deaf. And when Western Union realized the importance of the telephone, it tried for a time to compete with Bell by developing a machine of its own. And the man it commissioned to devise the machine was Thomas A. Edison. But Bell's patents proved unassailable. Edison's most significant achievement was unquestionably his perfection of the incandescent lamp or electric light bulb. Our electricity very soon was used to produce power as well as light. The substitution of electricity for steam power in factories was as liberating as that of steam for water power before the Civil War. Small, safe electric motors replaced dangerous and cumbersome mazes of belts and wheels. So we see that America really, the first stride of development for industry was to develop an interest in the science and technology. The railroads brought in the idea of competition and monopoly because railroads officials did not like rebating but found no way to avoid the practice for the fare that they were charging. And in that there were certain losses, but cheap transportation stimulated the economy. A few persons benefited from cutthroat competition. Small shippers and all business in cities and towns was limited rail outlets. The worst sufferers in this were the railroads themselves. The loss of revenue resulting from rate cutting combined with inflated debts put most of them in grave difficulty when faced with a downturn in the business cycle. And during the 1880s, major roads responded to these pressures by creating inter-regional system. These were the first giant corporations, capitalized in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So the next step that America learned was of corporations. Then the same thing is true of competition and monopoly in the steel industry. The iron and steel industry was also intensely competitive. Despite the trend toward higher production, demand varied erratically from year to year. And the kingpin of the industry was Andrew Carnegie. And this is a household name, not only in America, I think all the world over. Carnegie was born in Scotland and came to the United States in 1848 at the age of 12. His first job as a bobbin boy in a cotton mill brought him $1.20 a week. But his talent perfectly fitted the times and he rose rapidly. He saved his money, made some shrewd investments, and by 1868 he had an income of $50,000 a year. This is hard work, commitment, and being sincere to yourself always earns you. Then he decided to specialize in iron business, and he had grasped the importance of technological improvements. He was also a merciless competitor. Alarmed by his increasing control of the industry, the makers of furnished steel products such as barbed wire and tubing began to combine and to consider entering the primary field. Carnegie had a competitive temper, aroused, threatened to turn to finished product himself. A colossal steel was at war, and it was imminent. The same thing happened to competition and monopoly in oil. Because the pattern was the same, fierce and aggressive, and Standard Oil in this aggressive competitive phenomena emerged victorious in the competitive wars. And although the Henry DeMarcus Lloyd was a bold and during all these aggressive battles, Rockefeller came up, who was far too orderly and astute to enjoy a free swinging battles that plagued the industry. From the company's point of view, the Rockefeller's company, monopoly was not the purpose of the trust, and centralization of the management of diverse and far-flung operations in the interest of efficiency was its chief work, and that is how they succeeded. Then the same competition and monopoly came for retailing and utilities. The telephone and electric lighting industries were also plagued by competition, and Americans were almost ambivalent to big business. Then there were reforms, and the reforms came first by a few gentlemen of intelligence and caution. Reformers, the Marxists became the reformers for that the leading voice of the Socialist Labour Party, Daniel de Leon, was a different type. And how the government reacted to big business, the railroad regulations came up, and this brought the business into a form of very regulated business. The right of Congress was established to regular private corporation engaged in interstate commerce, and that Federal Communication Commission did it in 1934. Then came the Sherman Antitrust Act by the government. This Sherman Act, basically, unlikely it was for it that other combinations of manufacturers could be convicted under the law. So Andrew Carnegie was asked by a committee of the House of Representatives to explain how he had dared participate in the formation of the U.S. Steel Corporation. He replied, "Nobody ever mentioned the Sherman Act to me that I remember." And then a very effective movement started, that was a union movement. And this union movement was that most union members were artisans such as cigar makers, printers, carpenters, and aside from iron makers, railroad workers and miners, few industrial laborers were organized. So this organization of union came to another organization which was known as the American Federation of Labor, and labor militancy then was rebuffed when they became too confident of their work. So, the most important strike of the period took place in 1894, and was it Wither America or Wither Democracy? So, these unions or their strikes were threatening. Centralization basically was taken as the path, and it increased efficiency in industries that used a great deal of expensive machinery to turn out goods for the mass market. So, while serving the nation in their hard work, the industrialization basically made America what it is today.